Oh, so how's it going?
It's been an interesting 2 weeks.
Yes.
Yeah.
He says that
Busy.
every 2 weeks, so.
It's
That's
always
true.
interesting. Yeah. Life is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's been fascinating. There's been a lot of changes in my personal life
Yeah.
between taking care of my mother and all this kind of stuff. So it's been
Right.
a lot of work and a lot of pressure for that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
all good, hopefully.
Yeah. Interesting. We're talking about change today. So this will be good. Yeah. This will be
That's
good
the one
for
thing
you.
that's constant.
It is the only thing that's constant.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good, how are you?
Good. Good. Christine said she was working with you in the Leadership Books Fair program too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. My husband did that the year I moved up here, or actually it was the year before I moved up here. Yeah, so
Are you related to the lawyer that's on TV?
I am.
Who's that?
Ed,
Your husband?
that's my husband.
Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
yeah, yeah, that's him.
So there's a connection, right?
There's a connection, yeah. Yeah, sometimes we lose the connection a little, but.
And his partner's Speller, so
Speller.
you know that.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, they're good guys. So is anyone else joining us?
No, my dad just called. He's got an appointment, so
Okay.
he can't, but he'll do the on demand or the the rebroadcast.
Recording, yep. We have it all set up, so we're recording now. And it's great to see all of you. I wanted to just start with the meditation today. So we're gonna sit up nice and tall. We're gonna start seated, but we're actually going to be standing and walking a little today.
Okay.
So that'll be fun and different too. But we'll start seated. And just again, just coming to the front of your chair, just so you could find a nice steady seat and grounding your hands. And close your eyes. And just taking a moment to really settle into your seat, into your body. Bring your attention into your spine. So we're going to start there today. And imagine yourself just taking a very noble, dignified seat. Just by lifting up through the spine, creating a little space there. Keeping the spine strong. You could take a few deep breaths here if that helps. And notice if you lift the crown of your head up towards the ceiling, towards the sky above. That it creates just a little more space inside. This act of reaching through the crown of the head. Just very subtle movement here, nothing strong. Notice any sensations in the shoulders, if the shoulders are holding a lot of tension and feel stuck or heavy, stiff perhaps, or open and soft. Maintaining that lift through the crown of the head, that reach through the spine. dignified, noble, yet relaxed. Now guide your attention down to your feet. Notice if the feet feel weighted. And if they don't, see if you could just weight them down a little, dropping some energy there. And now notice the sit bones, notice the hips, providing that foundation for that steady, noble spine. And now just bring your attention into your hands. Noticing the weight of the hands against your legs. Any warmth that might be there, any texture. Notice if your hands feel relaxed or tense. Imagine your hands themselves breathing in and out. And notice how the breath is moving inside this body. Notice when the mind is pulled away with thoughts or plans, sounds or imaginings. And gently return to the anchor of your hands. Noticing that the breath and the body are really inseparable. That we could anchor our attention in the breath, but anchoring your attention in the body doesn't really change the experience, it just enhances it differently. The body breathing, every cell infused with oxygen and energy. So yes, even the hands breathe. And just keeping your attention there for a few more moments. I'll be sharing a poem with you that Christine wrote about your hands. Just let these words move through you. These hands. Feel into these hands, your hands, their form and shape, warm or cool, heavy in your lap or light, soft or rough. Can they be both of these things at the same time? Warm and cool, soft and rough, heavy and light. Feel the vibration of these hands, your hands, the vibration of the life that lives inside of these hands. These hands, your hands, these are the hands that reached for the one there to meet you, to greet you, to offer you your very first touch. These hands held hands while crossing the street, while learning to swim, while reaching for the balloon that almost got away, while holding the thin, moist stem of the dandelion that you marveled at as it swayed in the wind. These are the hands that touched the preciousness of the face of your beloved and decided, yes, you. Yes, you. I want you to walk with me hand in hand. These hands, your hands, built your life, offered comfort and care. These are the hands that heal. These hands, your hands, learned about holding on and letting go. Holding on and letting go. Holding on and letting go. These hands, your hands, with you from the time you entered, with you until you depart. These hands, your precious hands. How are things now inside? Just noticing the body as it is. Noticing the breath right now, just as it is. Noticing the mind right now, just as it is. Just bring your right hand now to your heart or your belly, and your left hand on top of your right hand. And just take 3 long, deep breaths. Just emptying the exhale completely. Feeling the body breathe. Just relaxing your gaze down, gently opening your eyes, inviting light back in, and coming into the space back together. Well, good morning. You could see how just taking a few moments, whether we're dropping into our breath, whether we're dropping into our body, whether we're just noticing how things are, or adding, a little bit of flavor through a poem or some music. We had sounds here to work with. But just noticing when we're pulled away, noticing when we're back, noticing when we feel distracted, noticing when we return. And it just reinforces the simplicity of the practices, right? Because we have a tendency to make them harder than what they are, right? Overcomplicate things. The mind will get really busy and judgmental. You'll notice that critic part of you popping up as you go through your practices, as you go through your efforts. You might start noticing yourself over effort a little, right? Or start striving or measuring, right? What's happening. So I want you to notice these parts of you come up in your practice and just continue to remind yourself that it's really about the art of just relaxing, the art of accepting how we are right now in this body, just as it is, in this breath, just as it is, and accepting it all with kind of an openness, a curiosity, interest, okay? So I wanted to just kind of talk about how things have been for you over the last 2 weeks before we get into some new content, and make sure there aren't any questions that are just kind of surface here. So I'm just going to open this up to you guys for a moment, and then we'll get started. Is anyone having a lot of difficulty, or do you find that it's helping? Do you notice this helping at all?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. And how are the formal practices on your own going?
Or just squeeze in. I can jump in.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
That's the hardest problem that I've had.
Okay. Are you getting to a point where you're opening up space at the same time every day?
Trying, but it's not always easy.
Right. It's not always easy.
Yeah.
When have you been trying for?
I try to do it in the morning, but unfortunately for phone calls like that.
Right.
They come in that I have to actually take overseas stuff, whatever.
I see. Okay, so that's challenging because of the time difference,
So
right?
Right, so then I have to push it off till later on in the day. And
Right.
it's not the same.
Right, right. I notice that for myself too. If I don't get the formal practice in the morning, my mind is harder to work with as I get into my day.
Too much fun.
Right. Now, is it possible that you could just shut it down and take yourself away from those calls? Just leave your phone maybe in another room?
It would be great, but unfortunately I can't do that for who I'm talking to. So it's
Okay.
just, it's a responsibility I have.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Well, you're doing the best you can. Yep. You could just give it an effort, and remember, you can always start again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the beauty of the practice, is that if it doesn't work out today or tomorrow or the next day, you could wake up on Thursday and you could just start again, right? And there will be time and space on one of those days for you.
yes.
Right. Good. I'm glad. Susan?
Well, I was going to say, mine is not as disciplined a practice, but I found it more as a tool. And so it shifts around based on when my most exasperated point of my day is.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, for example, last week, busy day, and I had a half an hour to go to a dinner, and I thought, I don't talk to anyone. I'm just at the point where I had so much going on, and I literally went up to my room and I thought, the most important thing I could do was take 3 minutes for myself. And I did.
Good.
More than 3 minutes. And I was like, that was such a good use of that 3 minutes.
Right. Right.
So and I found out that even when I'm super tired when I do it, I don't fall into sleep. I'm actually like, oh wait, like I slip right into that space where I'm like, wait, I don't need to sleep right now. I can do mindfulness here. So
Right. Right. We need to know the difference between when we need to just quit or give up or go to sleep and when we just need a break.
Yeah.
Right? We just need 5 minutes to ourselves, and we could recalibrate the system and kind of open to whatever situation we're in. And that's what these practices are for. Now, the formal practices are still really important, right? So we want to, and mostly from a neurological perspective, because that's really what retrains the brain and creates those neural pathways so that we have clearer and cleaner access to those moments when we are exasperated, when we're triggered, when, you know, we start being wrangled around with our emotions or situations or people in our life, right? Because sometimes it's great that you had access to the practices when you noticed, right, that, oh, I just really need a break. So that means that whatever you're doing is supporting you and it's helping you, right? But sometimes we could be in situations that are really triggering and really overwhelming. And without those formal practices, that daily-ish practice, we might not have access, right? That's when we notice ourselves being really reactive, right? But it's not always realistic to have 5 minutes even. And I know what that feels like. You know, I got back, I traveled home from Italy on Saturday, and we traveled for 14 hours, you know, before we got home, between, you know, planes, trains, and automobiles. And there was no practice. There was no time for practice on Saturday. So I kept moving through the day, just trying to find moments of mindfulness, whether that was 5 minutes or 30 seconds, just to notice how my breath is right now. How is my body right now? I get very anxious traveling, especially in airplanes. You know, there's this like complete loss of any sense of control. You kind of like surrender over to this experience. And of course, you know, you're spending 8 hours in an airplane and you're, you know, squished in there with people around you and no space. So we could always pause and notice and be with what is in a really mindful, open presence that offers us that spaciousness that we might need in any given moment. So that's a little bit of what we're talking about. But today we're really, did anyone else have anything else you wanted to share? Or?
I'll say that for whatever reason, I didn't practice much last week.
Mm-hmm.
And towards the end of the week, I found myself very reactive.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely feel that when I get up and I do, you know, the meditation,
Right.
that it starts my day off so that I'm much more responsive and not reactive.
Right. Yeah. And you know what?
It's so
Sometimes that's the best thing to do once you've had a practice going for a little while, because sometimes we take it for granted. Like, oh, I feel great. Yeah, I think it's working, but you know, whatever. And then when we step away from it for a few days, like my capacity for being without a practice when I first started was like 3 days. Like I could go 3 days without my practice, and it, you know, I could jump back or drop back into it and be fine. Now it's really such a daily practice for me that I really notice just missing one day. You know, I just don't feel the same. And so it makes us prioritize it a little bit more, right? It becomes more valuable when perhaps we step away for a week because things are hectic and we notice, ooh, you know, my temper is a little flared up more than usual. I'm not as patient as I was or as I've gotten used to being. My capacity has shifted or changed. And then that just increases our motivation. And it increases our motivation to practice, to prioritize the practice, to set really clear boundaries with our families and our clients, right, in our situations. And so it creates more discipline. So it's okay to have those little pockets because I think it's a value to really notice, right? And I think that as we move along, what you'll see at the end of these 8 weeks is that you'll have so many different methods to work with that you'll notice when a method like sitting might not be the right method, when we're feeling a lot of emotional distress, when we're going through a lot of personal change, when we're feeling a lot of pressure from work or family obligations, sitting might not be the best approach. It may require a walk outside. It may require a standing meditation. It may require a body practice or working with feelings or emotions or mind busyness, right? So that's what we're getting into. We've established this anchor in the breath. It's a wonderful anchor to use. You could use it for the rest of your life. It could be your only practice. If it really resonated with you, it doesn't mean that you're going to stop using it. It just means that you're learning other ways, other techniques, other ways of being with yourself in a mindful way. And we're kind of launching off into mindfulness of body this week and in our next session. Okay, so mindfulness of body, mindfulness of breath is actually under that first foundation of mindfulness. So did you guys notice in the meditation I said you really can't separate the breath from the body, right? If the body's not breathing, we're not alive, right? If the breath can't be breathing on its own, right? So we really can't separate it, but it's where we start, because often we could find a lot of spaciousness there. We could start tapping in, right? It becomes an anchor that's accessible for most people. But right from the beginning, I said, you know what? You may not be able to find your breath. And if that's happening for you, just bring your hands to your chest and notice your body breathing. That's really mindfulness of body, just noticing that expansion and contraction of the breath. So even though that's a breath practice, it is a body practice also, right? So even if, you mentioned, Ellen, that, I get interrupted and I have to take this call. And if you notice your phone ringing and you're supposed to be meditating, you could pause for a moment and just take a deep breath and let the phone ring 3 times, because they're going to let it ring 3 times. And it just could reframe your energy completely by just dropping into a deep, full, conscious breath, right? And then you could pick up your practice when you're done, even though that might be harder, right? So the body practices, last week or 2 weeks ago, after we met, I also included some yin yoga poses, and you guys got those in the last email, right? Did you notice them? Okay. So many people come into a mindfulness practice through movement and through their body, because their breath might not be the way in, right? So those positions that I mentioned are 3 very gentle positions that you could start weaving in or integrating into any of these practices by just placing your body in a shape. All right, so let me show you some of those that we could do right in our chairs if we're here in the office with our heels on, okay? So push away from the table a little, right? And if you are comfortable taking your shoes off, I'm gonna ask you to do that. But if you're not, don't worry about it, okay? So you don't have to take your socks off. And you guys are lucky because you have this really beautiful room. Okay, nobody's gonna be looking at your feet, but I want you to just feel the textures of the carpet or the textures of your feet in your socks, okay? Good. All right. So now that we're all here, just step your feet forward a little. So you're creating more of an angle with your legs, okay? Now I want you to be close enough to the table that you could reach with your hands, okay? So bringing your hands to the desk, just reach your hands forward and drop your head down. So we're just going into a forward fold, relaxing the shoulders. You could take a minute here, just allowing the head to hang heavy, feeling your feet on the ground, and just take a few deep conscious breaths here. And one more full breath. Good, now stretch your fingers out and ground your hands. So bring some aliveness there. And now shift back in your chair so that you feel your sit bones reach back and some space open up in your low back. So you're gonna feel like you're stretching your spine out a little. I'm gonna just stand up so I can just check on everybody. Good. Good, so notice how you could reach through the sit bones and create some space in the low back. Now, bring your attention into the low back in this shape and notice if there's any sensation there, any discomfort. Notice if it created any space. And if you notice any judgment about this experience coming up, just acknowledge that and return into the body for a moment. And see if you notice any other feedback. And just opening that window or opportunity for some curiosity to rise up. Just 3 more breaths here. Good. Good, now ground your feet and pull your chair a little closer to the desk. Good, and lift back up. And sit up nice and straight. Good, how was that? Okay, so any forward fold that you do with your body, just even sitting in your chair and forward folding, is calming for the central nervous system. Okay, so it calms things down. So if you have anxiety bubble up, for instance, or something that could trigger anxiety, so any fear, frustration, agitation, anger, right? Any other person that you know could trigger any of those things, you might not be able to access the breath. It could already be reacting. The body could already be responding to that feedback. So putting yourself in a physical shape that calms the system and provides that feedback might be what you need instead of trying to tap into the exhale, which also has that quality, right? Did you guys notice that, or was that not a felt sense for you in that short experience? It's different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's something you could work with and get used to. Now, it's even more effective if you could just drop onto the floor, right? Whether that's sitting on a pillow with just a little bit of support underneath the sit bones, and even a rolled blanket underneath the knees, and just dropping forward in your seat. Or, you know, if you're very flexible, just sitting on the floor and folding into a bend, right? So any which way you could do it, I want you to know that it could be uncomfortable at first. It should never be painful. So we have to always walk that fine line between discomfort and pain, right? Triggers for pain are typically anything that's hot or fiery or electrical or sharp or stabbing. Okay, so if you would describe sensation with any of those adjectives, then it's something we should come up and back away from. But if it's just like a kind of like a dull kind of achy discomfort, I want you to stay with it and imagine your breath dropping there. Okay, so that's when we could use the breath, when we notice the feedback from the body. So the body will always provide the feedback that we need. What the body sensations also do in these practices is they give the mind something to work with. They give the mind a job. So now, instead of the mind being all busy with a trigger, emotional trigger or physical trigger or interpersonal relationship that's triggering you, now the mind's thinking about the discomfort in the low back, or the stretch in the hips or the legs, or the relaxation in the shoulders. And those busy mind thoughts settle down. Okay, so we're tricking the mind a little. Okay, what we start noticing when we're practicing mindfulness is that you don't always have to believe your thoughts. They're not always true, right? So we don't always have to feed them, right? So just by pausing, noticing that we're triggered, pausing, noticing the breath. Oh, my breath's already triggered. And then instead of just kind of going down that rabbit hole with what the system's doing, we could interrupt the response and just drop into our bodies for a moment. Okay, so that's just some of the practices. On the other side of it, the back bends will stimulate energy. So just as the inhale provides us with that wakeful quality, that little a vibrancy that comes in on the in-breath. A back bend, a gentle back bend will do the same thing. So you may have noticed in the literature, and I'll resend those to you again this week so you don't have to go back and dig for them. We had you laying on your floor in Sphinx pose, just like when you're a little kid laying in front of the TV. Do you guys remember doing that, right? With your feet up, right? You could get on the floor, lay down, and place your body into a gentle back bend. And if that's a little too much, just slide the elbows further forward so it's not putting yourself in a deep back bend. If that creates too much tension, you could bring a cushion underneath your elbows or shoulders or belly to support the shoulders so that they could relax. But just that gentle back bend is gonna wake up the system. So at 3 o'clock when we all feel like taking a nap, that we're gonna crash, right? Especially during this crazy season of being a mother, right? And trying to get everywhere with all of these extra things they throw at us in May, right? We could just, instead of feeling like we're gonna crash or grabbing a cup of coffee that might make us feel even more anxious, we could just drop in our bellies for 5 minutes and breathe, right? And that'll wake us up and give us just enough so that we can get through all of our responsibilities for the day and then still fall into restful sleep at night, okay? So just these little tricks. On top of that, all of the shapes that I provided in there were 3 of them: butterfly, Sphinx pose, and what else did I give you? I don't remember.
Writing them.
Wide-legged child's pose. Yeah, it was a little attachment, so they were at the bottom of the email, and I'll make sure you have them.
Okay.
Yeah, so that wide-legged child's pose, yeah. So all 3 of them are great, and if we could stack them into a little practice, just holding each shape for 2 to 3 minutes and having like a 9 or 10 minute practice out of it, fantastic. But if you could only do 1, that's great too. The idea is once we place the body into a shape like that, we stay there, and that's the meditation for 3 minutes. So we commit to the shape that we put ourselves in, we commit to the amount of time that we're gonna stay, and we commit to not being fidgety, right? So there's a podcast called 10% Happier. I think I may have mentioned it before. But they also have a book that they just came out, and it's called Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics, right? So it's hard. Right. Yeah, Alan's on Amazon, right? Great book, but it's true. We get really fidgety. So we notice when we have that urge to move or change the body. We notice that urge to look up or scratch an itch that we're noticing, or feed into a sensation that's calling us out, right? Even that discomfort. And instead of feeding that urge to move or fidget, we stay. And that's the meditation. So it's the same thing as noticing that we're pulled away in thought, noticing that we're being distracted with sound or sensation or planning or whatever's coming up, and returning to the anchor of the breath or the body, right? In this case, we're in a physical shape that's going to stimulate sensation, and sometimes it could be really uncomfortable, but I want you to know that that's the point. We start working with discomfort, right? So we could get really creative, right? We could get really creative. So we could be at work and you could bring your sit bones back and just drop your body down into a forward fold and hang, right? Or we could use our desk and just stretch out the spine, or we could stand up. So let's give it a stand up. Okay, so I talked about Sphinx pose being that forward fold. And if we don't have an access, like if you're in the office and geez, I'm not gonna lay down on the floor, or maybe you will. Maybe you'll bring your mat, yoga mat or cushion in, or have a room set up here, whatever. And you could just lay down on the floor and stretch your back out and take that call from Europe while you're on the call, right? While you're in your position. Or you could just stand up. Okay, so ground your feet. Okay, and just keep your hands here. Actually, bring your hands to your belly. Okay, and close your eyes. And now I want you to just take one moment here. We're going to stand here for about 30 seconds and try to be perfectly, perfectly still. So absolutely no movement. If you notice any urge to move or shift or perfect this standing shape, just notice that urge and return to stillness. So not feeding in to any of these urges or feelings. Perfect stillness. Notice your breath. Open your eyes and relax your hands. So that's impossible, right? It's impossible to be perfectly still. There's always internal movement going on. There's always this vibration. But what did that 30 seconds of stillness do to you? Was anyone thinking about anything else but being still? Right. It just centers the mind. It pauses. So now the mind has a job and it says, oh, I'm just supposed to be perfectly still. What's moving? Oh, this is moving. Right? Right. Right. And then all the busyness of the mind dissolves. Okay, so we notice that it changes things. Okay, so we could start there. And just 30 seconds is enough because when we close the eyes, we start getting a little wobbly, right? So we don't want to overdo it. So just taking 30 seconds to a minute at most could be enough to just recenter the mind. So when we feel a little anxious, but we could start there with a gentle movement practice. So now we're just going to work with the breath. Okay, so I'm going to just demonstrate what that's going to look like, and then we'll all do it together. I think we're going to need a little more room, so let's spread out enough that you can open your arms up and not be touching anyone. Good. Awesome. Very good. So I'm going to show you what this is going to look like, and then we'll do it together. We're just going to inhale. Reach up through the heart, and then exhale, bring the hands to the heart. Release the hands down. Then we're going to inhale. Exhale. Release the hands. Inhale. Exhale, hands to heart. Empty the breath. Release the hands down. Inhale. Exhale. Pause. Inhale. So notice what's happening with the breath. Fill up. Exhale. Empty, 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 empty. Hold the breath out. No breath in the body. Inhale. Exhale, hands to heart. Empty, 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 empty. No breath. Pause. Inhale. Fill up, fill up, fill up, fill up, fill up, fill up. Hold the breath. Exhale. Exhale, exhale. Empty it all out. Release the hands down. No breath in. Pause. Inhale. Arms reach. Exhale. Hands to heart. Release the hands down. Good. Return to normal breathing. Just 3 full breaths. And relax for a moment. Okay, so we could work with the breath that we need at that moment. So notice how I added some pauses in. Okay, the pauses, what they do is they create a little harmony with the energy of breathing. So remember, the inhales will alert, they'll make the system feel alert and alive and vivid and open and energized, right? So did you feel a little bit of that? And plus we're opening up the heart, we're reaching up, and that creates a little back bend in the thoracic spine. So that opens the ribs, it massages the liver, and it gets the lungs really opening and closing and energizes the system. So we feel like this little freshness, right? By just taking a few rounds of breathing with movement, with conscious movement, okay? And you could call this yoga, you could call it mindful movement. It's really supposed to be the same thing, okay? What we've done to yoga in the United States is kind of an atrocity. It's no longer really yoga, right? It's just union of movement with breathing. That's what yoga is supposed to be, and that's what you were all just doing, mindful movement, okay? So that little back bend, opening the breath up, opening the lungs, holding it in for a moment, exhaling, emptying the breath completely out, detoxifies the system, and then we pause again, right? And we can pay more attention to the inhale if we need it, right? So we could inhale big and then exhale and not have any pauses, right? And that's going to enliven things. Or we could focus on the exhale. So an inhale and then a long exhale, empty, empty, empty. And that's going to relax the system a little bit, right? Now we'll still have the opening of the chest, which makes things different. So what do we do when we need a little bit more with the exhale? So I'm going to demonstrate this, but I want you guys to have your chairs kind of in front of you. So we're going to turn the chair, so I'm just going to turn this down so they could see it. All right, and it helps to have a sturdy chair, not one with wheels. So I want you guys to all be careful while we're doing this here. And I'm going to take this necklace off. Okay. So if we need a little bit more from the exhale because we need the system to relax, we'll take an inhale, reach the arms up, and then on the exhale, we'll not only bring the hands down, but we'll reach the hips back. And we'll just kind of breathe here for a few breaths. Okay? Good. So just be careful, especially if you feel dizzy. See if you could ground your hands and reach through your hips. Good. Notice how if you reach through the backs of the hips, there's some space that opens in the low back. See if you could take your breath there by just dropping your attention into the low back, visualizing the inhale going into the low back space or any tension that you're experiencing, and the exhale creating a little more space there. Good. Now inhale, halfway lift. So if you're not sure what that looks like, you can look over to me. So we're here in this forward fold, and we're going to inhale, halfway lift. And then we're going to exhale and fold back down. We could do that a few times, as many times as you need. Inhale, halfway lift, open the eyes. Exhale, fold down, reach through the sit bones. Inhale, one more. And exhale, fold and reach. Feel that stretch in the arms, the shoulders, the low back, your hamstrings and hips. And now we'll inhale, come up again halfway, and walk the feet back into the chair. Good. Excellent. Good. How are you guys feeling? Good. So just a way to kind of open and create energy in the body with some mindful movement, which is a more active practice, what we just did, or the passive practice, which is taking one of those shapes, sitting either on your chair or taking some of the yin yoga postures that I put out there for you and staying there for 3 to 5 minutes. So we could use the body practices in this way, okay? Now, a standing meditation practice, when do we use standing meditation? What would you think? When would be a good time to use it?
In the morning. Yeah.
Sure, it could be at any time of the day, for sure. But especially when we notice our systems are feeling sluggish, if we start noticing ourselves like nodding off, have you guys experienced that a little? That sometimes the meditation can make you feel sleepy, right? And you start kind of nodding off, right? So just standing up, right? When we need a little bit of energy, or if the body itself isn't sitting, if you notice a lot of discomfort in the seated practice, And that mostly happens when we're sitting for long periods of time, right? Last week when I was at retreat, we were sitting for, like 30 to 45-minute intervals, but for like 6 to 8 hours a day. So for some of those evening meditations, when we've already been sitting for 5, 6 hours, your legs and hips and low back is killing you. So you'll see a lot of people stand up and do their meditation standing. And what does that do? It brings more attention into what's happening, right? So we experienced in just 36 seconds of standing that we felt a lot of vibrancy there. We noticed that the mind really calmed itself, that everything settled down. Well, the same thing will happen in these standing meditations, but we're not closing the eyes, because now we're asking ourselves to be there for 3 to 5 minutes or 7 minutes or 10 minutes, okay? So what is the posture? So we could stand up nice and tall. We're grounding our feet, and it always helps to be barefooted here when we're practicing these at home, right? The shoes, you could do it with shoes on for sure. So say, for instance, you're at the post office, or you're in a line at an amusement park or something, right? And it's getting crazy and you feel overwhelmed. You could just do this standing. Nobody's gonna even know, right? So you could use these practices when you want. But when you're doing your formal practices, it's really nice to get the feet grounded, right? Because then we can really feel kind of those subtle shifts and movements of the body kind of centering itself. You could keep your hands down. You can keep them behind you, just kind of softly, dropping your hands here at the low back. Or you could take your hands together at the belly or bring them right onto your belly. Okay, so this belly space becomes our center, right? So whatever feels most comfortable for you. Sometimes, it's more comfortable for my shoulders to be here. Sometimes it's more comfortable for my shoulders to be here. Sometimes I really want to get centered and I'll bring my hands to my belly, or I'm feeling very raw and emotional and I just bring my hands to my heart. So that depends, and it's up to you, okay? So we're just going to take a position. We're going to stand with it for a 2-minute meditation. I'm going to time us. And we're going to stand up nice and tall. Remember, we're taking this noble, dignified spine, right? The gaze comes down. So drop the gaze down to the floor or the table and just pick one spot to rest your gaze on. So that's called the drishti in the practice. And now just bring your attention into your feet. Notice your knees over your ankles. Notice your hips over your knees. Notice the support of the spine coming from the strength of the hips and your low belly. You might feel some muscular engagement in the quadriceps or your abdominal muscles. Notice your shoulders over your hips. And now bring your attention to the crown of the head. And just feel the back of the neck release as the crown of the head reaches up gently towards the sky. Notice if this changes the spine at all. Notice if this changes the distribution of weight or energy in your feet. And now just notice the body breathing. Notice if you've been pulled away. Gently return to the anchor of the body, breathing. And relax the arms. You can lift your gaze. Okay. We can return to the practice. So that was 3 minutes, actually. Okay, so we spent 2 minutes just looking at the standing posture, right? Just tapping into that and noticing the distribution of weight, the distribution of energy, how the body, excuse me, is stacking, right? You could bring all of your attention to center if that's what you need. Right? We talked about how powerful that is. And then just noticing, how is the body breathing right now? And that 3 minutes goes by really fast. Okay, how was that for you? Any questions? Yeah, unbelievably, we're almost out of time. So let's take a seat. No, it goes by fast. There's a couple things I want to mention before we move on. Okay, so we're wrapping it up today. We'll have to look at the walking meditations on our next session. We're also going to be doing a mindfulness of eating discussion and talk about pain and working with pain in the body. So just be prepared for some food that I'll be bringing in for us to share together. And I'll bring everything we need. You guys don't have to provide anything, but I just wanted to give you a heads up on that, okay? So today, just noticing that I want you to really notice for the next 2 weeks how you could integrate some of these body practices in, okay? So having a formal practice still every day, but having some freedom to notice when you need mindfulness of breath and you need a seated meditation versus, oh, when could a body practice be more beneficial? So now I'm giving you a choice, okay? You could do those meditations using the shapes that I provided, or standing up and just trying to be still, or using that last standing meditation where we're just standing, stacking our bones, breathing in and out, and setting the gaze. Eyes are open for that, okay? The mindful movement, when I was showing you the stretching and opening, that's really just a sun salutation, is an informal practice that you could weave in. So is really that standing one where we try to be perfectly still. That's really an informal practice. So it would be more of a tool or method, an inner resource that we can access when we feel like we need it throughout the day. The stretching and opening, again, that too, all right? So really your choices for a formal body practice would be using either butterfly, wide-legged child's pose, or sphinx pose, and staying there for 3 to 5 minutes, or standing up, right? And being really still, okay? Movement practices are meant to bring our attention to any sensations that are happening. So any of the body meditation practices, we really do want to notice sensation. So when you feel your body responding in any way with any feedback, you could follow that feedback inside and look deeper. So I may have mentioned before, sometimes I like to imagine like a looking glass, right? What are they called? You know, the lens, the magnifying glass, right? So I like to imagine that magnifying glass in my practice, whether I'm in, you know, seated breathing practices or body practices. So anything that's coming up with sensation, I almost imagine taking the looking glass into that space inside. What else is there, right? What's happening right now? And then adding that layer of breath. Can I access the breath there? How does it feel when I breathe into my hip? How does it feel when I breathe into the tension in my shoulder? How can I be with this sensation as it changes? And knowing that it will, trusting that the only thing we could count on is everything changing. And that idea of impermanence, which is the second mind changing or mind thought, fits really beautifully into the theme of preciousness that we talked about in our last session. So these precious moments of our life are fleeting. They're impermanent. We don't get to stay in them, right? Life keeps changing. So it gives us this motivation and sense of urgency to be fully in those moments when they're happening, right? And that just opens us up into this heart space that's very grateful. And remember, gratitude can't coexist with feelings of unworthiness, feelings of frustration, overwhelm, anxiety. If we could shift ourselves away from the anxiety of things changing into the preciousness of what's here right now, everything else falls away, right? So we could trick the brain in that way too. And we could also use impermanence, or this concept of impermanence, in the opposite way. When we're in a situation that's really miserable, right? When things are feeling really out of control, when we feel like we cannot keep up with whatever's on our list or plans or responsibilities, know that this too will change. It's not going to be like this forever, right? And that gives us a little more control over what's happening. We know that we can trust it, that this situation is not permanent. Whenever we start feeling like we are solid and permanent, that's when suffering happens, right? Whenever we're feeling rigid and solid and permanent in any situation, we create our own suffering, because then the mind just ruminates and ruminates and ruminates over it. So we have to notice when that's coming up for us, and we could shift our way out, okay? And that too will help us get access into the prefrontal cortex, and we don't get like entangled into this response of the body, this fight or flight or freeze response where we feel stuck. Okay, so we're trying to shift away, noticing when it's happening and using these methods and practices to change the situation, right? The idea of any meditation practice is to look in on purpose. Okay, so think of it that way. We're looking in on purpose. We're curious. We really want to, what's the word I'm looking for? Cultivate that interest and curiosity, right? So when we notice, if you notice yourself being really judgmental about what's here, instead shift to curious. Okay, so my body is uncomfortable. I'm going to be with this instead of push it away and pretend it's not there. Okay, so we're looking in on purpose. We're looking towards discomfort on purpose. We want to turn towards it instead of running away from it or hiding it. We're kind of uncovering everything. We're asking it to kind of be friends, right? There's a story of the Buddha, and he was talking to his followers and giving them, talks about what was happening and his philosophies and this and that. And some of his they're called arhants, his most precious followers, right? These other monks that were practicing with him and this and that. One of his highest monks came to him and he said, Mara's here. And Mara in this philosophy represents like evil, right? Like the devil in Christian religions. And he kept trying to get the Buddha's attention while the Buddha was giving his talk. And he said, Mara's here. I could see Mara's lurking around. He's trying to, create havoc and problems and this and that. And the Buddha just said, it's okay. And he says to Mara, Mara, I see you. Right? So he's turning towards whatever's happening. And he said, come, let's have tea, right? So we notice when it's coming up, we stay interested in it and aware, right? And then these discomforts, they shift, they change. They help us believe in the impermanence, and preciousness arises. Gratitude comes out of that, right? Because now things have shifted, now things have changed. So there's just these different ways of working with it. Mindfulness is really the practice of studying nowness. So now always changes. Right now will never be here again. Right? We'll get together again in 2 weeks, but it's not right now. Now is happening right now. And again, right? So it's ever changing. It's that study of experience. And lastly, the only other thing I'm going to give you for today, because we're running out of time, is we could surrender inside to anything that's coming up, right? Sometimes when we're holding on, when we notice sensation rise up, when things get uncomfortable, a lot of other things can happen, right? We can notice emotions attached to it. We can notice stories come up. The mind will start thinking. It could bring up a scenario that happened 20 years ago, 10 minutes ago. It could be worries about the future. Just be willing to see whatever arises, acknowledge it, and anchor back into the breath or the body just as it is, right? Instead of pushing these things away, just being curious about it, being interested, but not feeling so entangled or attached. We're gonna start working with emotions in a couple weeks. You'll be with Christine working with that. And so we will look a little deeper eventually, but we're still just acknowledging, noticing, taking interest, and then redirecting back into an anchor, okay? And these practices are important because that's what gives us the foundation to kind of tackle some of the bigger stuff that comes up in the practices. So that was kind of a lot. What else do you have? What questions do you have for today? Do you find the body practices like refreshing? Like, oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes in the first couple of lessons, they could feel a little boring. Like, oh, goodness gracious, how much longer is she going to teach us about the breath, right? But it is really important to have that foundation. And it's something that you could work with for the rest of your life, just mindfulness of breathing. So I just want to reinforce that as a thought. Right? We're giving you a lot in 8 weeks and 16 weeks to process and work with. And some of these things will go right through you and you won't think about much. Some will feel really appropriate for where you're at right now. So pay attention to the practices that you feel connected to. Feel free to let go of some of it that you don't. Okay? So if you walk away from today and you sit tomorrow, and you just anchor in the breath, you're not doing it wrong. You're not going to disappoint me, all right? It's just what you need. Trust that inner instinct, right? That's guiding you. These practices really connect us into that inner voice.
And it does work. I mean,
It does work.
I know I was telling Anne-Marie because it's like the past 2 weeks have been like just very chaotic.
Yeah.
And it came to a point where my son, he's like, you're not looking too good. And he checks the blood pressure and it's like, 140/87 and 130. Like the numbers were like really high.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like every day, like I noticed, you're fine in the morning, but by the end of the day, it's just like you got work, you got, your family life, you got, elderly parents. So there's so much going on. So when you get home, it's like, oh no, like this isn't good. But you just like stand, you do the breathing techniques, and you just take that couple minutes, and then you actually, then see it drop, and then you're better. So it's like, okay, maybe we don't need the doctor, but it's just, but it does, it does help.
It does.
It does.
I had a student that came to me years ago, and she was a dental hygienist, right? They're the assistants. for 30 years. Her husband's a dentist. And she came to me as a last resort because she was going into surgery. She had a surgeon. They wanted to do next cervical spinal surgery on her neck. And she had lost complete sensation along the whole left side of her face, right? And I said, I don't know if I could help. I said, but, you know, let's take it real, like, let's be really gentle. And if anything, if you have to face the surgery, this will help in your recovery. So let's just breathe. We'll stretch a little. I noticed there was a ton of, just along the entire left side, you could see incredible tension. But what was most interesting is you could see this right side was overly stressed, right? Overly stretched out, right? She had all this tension that she was holding on her left side, and she had all this like extra space on the right, okay? So it's like, I think, you know, maybe we could just work on creating a little more space on this left side and more strength on the right. And let's just breathe, you know? And that's what we did. All we did, she signed up for like 10 privates or something. Within 4 weeks, she had such transformative relief from all of the symptoms that she was having that she delayed her surgery. By the end of 10 sessions that we had together, she called up her surgeon and she told him to F off. And she never got the surgery. She started coming to yoga regularly. Well, all we did is we released all that tension. You have to imagine, this woman was sitting, holding instruments for her husband for 30 years in a specific position. She came out, her husband retires, she retires, and then her body didn't know what to do, right? Yeah. It was in the same pattern for 30 years, 5 days a week. So the body holds on to trauma, the body holds on to patterns, the body holds on to all of our experiences and stimuli, everything. It's always reacting and responding to our environments. And if we're putting our bodies into different shapes every day, everything you're doing is putting your body into a shape. When you're sitting, typing at your computer, or looking at your phone, or driving, your body's pulling forward. We're shortening these muscles in the front body and overstretching everything in the back. And then we get done with our day and we wonder why we're in pain. Okay? So we got to work with it. We have to see what's there. And so don't be surprised if you notice things that you've never noticed before inside when you're doing these simple body mindfulness practices. And we can work with them. So I want you to really be communicative over the next 2 weeks. If you notice stuff come up, I could individualize some different things where you could hold your body in different positions to release some tension. So I'm very interested in that. If you notice really strong discomfort or pain, please just shoot me an email and say, hey, I'm noticing this. What do you think? All right. And I'll give you a very specific practice to do. Okay. We could use these practices to heal in a lot of different ways. Okay. All right. Well, I will let you guys go. If you have more questions, stay. I have time. But if you need to get to work, you can. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes.
I know.
Awesome. Good, good. I'm glad. And thank you. So if anyone's using,
My brother's with my dad, so I think they had an appointment this morning.
okay, no problem. Well, I